Hello, and welcome to the Community-Based Alternatives to Youth Incarceration Performance Measure Training Session. My name is Erin Rose Feely, and I am joined today by my colleague, Caitlin Hutchinson. We are Training and Technical Assistance Specialists providing contractor support to the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention for performance measures and performance management. Throughout our session today, you may see various terms and acronyms as we go through, so I wanted to just take a moment and list out some of the more common acronyms that you may see to ensure that there is a good understanding of what each of them means. Our objectives for today's session are first to start out with a review of the solicitation to understand how that connects to your performance measures. Then we'll take some time to do a deep dive into those performance measure questions specifically. Finally, we'll end by providing some additional performance reporting resources and ways to get in contact with our team.
Thank you, Erin. As Erin stated, my name is Kate Hutchison. We work alongside each other, providing training and technical assistance for OJJDP. So we'll go ahead and get started with the solicitation review. And before we do, just want to give a little bit of background. OJJDP's guiding philosophy is to enhance the welfare of America's youth and broaden their opportunities for a better future. To bring these goals to fruition, OJJDP is leading efforts to transform the juvenile justice system into one that will treat children, serve children at home with their families, in their communities, and open up opportunities for system-involved youth. OJJDP encourages all proposed applications that work with youth to highlight how the proposed program aligns with these priorities. When it comes to performance reporting, we all play a part. With the OJJDP grantee, you can see that the grantee's role is to create the performance management plan and report on the performance measure data. Grantee also monitors federal funds and the award timelines. As a grantee, you also report to your OJJDP grant manager. Your grant manager will help review your performance reports and help align performance measures to the award goals and approve budget changes. And finally, we have the performance management team. Performance management team helps to create performance measures, provides training and technical assistance or help desk support, and performs data analysis and data validations. We're all in this together. I'd like to provide you with some background for the Community-Based Alternatives to Youth Incarceration Initiative. As you can see, this initiative is designed to support jurisdictions to close youth detention and correctional facilities. This program furthers the Department of Justice mission to reduce recidivism, improve public safety by helping states reinvest resources into efforts that facilitate successful rehabilitation of justice-involved youth. You can see with the second point there, this initiative is heavily supported by training and technical assistance providers. The solicitation supports OJJDP priority areas. We see the first goal is to assist jurisdictions in closing and repurposing youth detention and correction facilities. The second goal being to assess and respond to the economic impact of closures on facility staff and surrounding communities. And the third goal is to reinvest that cost saving in expanding community-based alternatives to youth incarceration.
Thanks, Kate. Now let's take some time to go into the community-based alternatives to youth incarceration newly approved performance measures. Let's start first with the definition and questions document. This is a key document for all grantees as well as your teams because this is where the performance measures live outside of the Just Grant system. This document is also important because in addition to listing the questions, as you can see in that third column, there will also be some definitions that will help you understand those performance measures, hopefully a little bit better. Please note that throughout the definition and questions document, consider each performance measure as data collected during the activity period, it's usually about a 6-month time frame, unless the performance measure states otherwise. What we're going to do now is go through each individual section of the definition and questions document. We're going to cover the types of questions. For example, if it is an OJJDP, what we consider overall measure, meaning that this is a very, very broad-based measure assigned to quite a variety of grantees that will require you to put some additional shape and definition around it as you do your data collection. We're also going to go through each of the sections to highlight some of the key nuances within the questions. So let's start with one of our key sections, which is individuals served. I'd like to start by highlighting, as you will see on the definition and questions document in the third column, some of the questions associated with individuals served are going to have some nuances. First of all, you are going to have to separate out individuals served based on age, as you can see here, 0 to 10 or 11 to 17. There will be some additional questions that will also ask about family members. Again, because this is an overall measure, OJJDP has provided you with all available options. Please answer the specific performance measures aligned to the goals of your program. So for example, if your program seeks to work with only 11 to 17-year-olds, that's okay. Those will be the performance measures you will answer. The rest will have a 0. The second piece that I want to point out is that there are some slight differences between some of the questions asking for individuals who were new admissions, meaning that this is the first time that they were served with grant dollars in your program, or carried over, which is the way OJJDP may term someone who is a returning client or has been working with your program for multiple years. Please note that when you start your first performance report, everyone is considered a new admission because it will be the first reporting period under which they are receiving support with funds from this particular grant. So now let's go into the service delivery section. As we mentioned before, this will have some OJJDP overall measures, meaning very broad. And now we're also going to introduce OJJDP multi-program measures, meaning that these are questions that are a bit more specific to certain types of programs, but again, may often feel very general, and you will need to make sure that they align to your program goals. And you also may need to put some additional shape around them to assist with your data collection. So I want to highlight first the evidence-based practice or program performance measures. Please note these are different questions. And as you can see here, we have some definitions on the screen for an evidence-based practice. versus an evidence-based program. On the definition and questions document, in the center column, you will be able to find some resources to be able to track down what evidence-based practices or programs look like in real life. For example, the OJJDP Model Programs Guide or crimesolutions.gov are two popular resources. As I mentioned before, we have a multi-program measure at question number 4, which is asking about the number of individuals served by a diversion service. I want to highlight this question again because this is an example of where you may need to look at your program and recognize if you are providing diversion services, this will be a measure that you will need to report on. If your program is not doing diversion services, then you will answer 0 for this question. Also want to note that if your program is providing diversion services, we have some definitions here on the screen as well as on the definition and questions document. Diversion programs may look very different from community to community, and that is a place where you're going to have to put some additional time and definition around it. If this is a program that is working directly in the community with police, with prosecutors, each program is going to look a little bit different, and that's okay. This measure is broad on purpose. All right, now let's move on to question 5. This is asking about the number of individuals served by a multidisciplinary team. So, multidisciplinary team, again, there's a short definition here on the screen as well as on the definition and questions document. So you want to make sure that if the individuals that you're serving, whether they be youth or family, are served by a team of people that are working collectively towards a shared outcome for that client. Also make sure that the members of the team are coming from various disciplines. For example, a CASA worker, a case manager, a nurse, or a therapist. We want to make sure that this team has a wide variety of individuals on it.
Thank you, Erin. Now we'll head to the program output section. The section is multi-program, and as Erin said, multi-program measures aren't as broad as OJJDP overall measures, but you still might need to shape the data to make it work for your program. So let's look at question 6, which is asking and discussing the number of memorandums of agreements or understandings, otherwise known as MOA or MOU, implemented. And this is during the activity period during the 6 months. So the definition on the screen there is reading as MOAs or U's are formal partnering or coordination agreements between entities. So think back, during the last 6 months, has your program partnered with local Boys and Girls Club, a juvenile court, teen center, or a therapeutic after-school camp? If so, did you implement an MOA or MOU? If so, make sure to enter the correct number of MOAs or MOUs implemented during the activity period. Now we'll head over to the Training and Technical Assistance section. We see that this section covers questions 7 through 11, and these are OJJDP overall measures, which, once again, very broad definitions. You may remember in the beginning of this webinar, we discussed how a training and technical assistance provider would be helping move this solicitation or this initiative along. So we'll spend some time here discussing what training and technical assistance means and how to report on it. Again, these are OJJDP overall measures or an overall category. So you may read one of the questions or definitions and think that it does not apply to your program. And again, that's okay. These measures are meant to be distributed among a wide variety of different programs. And when we're discussing the measures, we're also looking to report on training events with OJJDP award funds. And we do understand the term technical assistance is broad. Also, when reporting JISC grants, we're asking to report numbers, but also the population or types of technical assistance in the text. So we'll go over these definitions and questions in just a moment. So this slide summarizes questions 7 through 9. You can see we've decided to break out some of the important information in these questions. So when reporting on training and technical assistance during the activity period, think about the types of training and technical assistance offered. Did you host a webinar? Or did you host an in-person training event or multiple in-person training events or a mixture of the two? Think about how you organized your training events. Meaning, did you have a specific TTA calendar, or otherwise known as training and technical assistance calendar, that easily keeps track of the number of events held each month, where they were held, who facilitated the training, who attended, and the specific population served? Or perhaps you received one official training request during this reporting period, but your organization held 3 training events. You'll see in questions 7 through 9, these data point questions will ask about specific populations trained, number of individuals trained, and where the training events were held. Moving forward to system improvement, this section covers questions 12 through 14 and has multi-program and program-specific questions, which program-specific questions are a bit more individualized for the solicitation, but again, may not apply to your exact program or exact services. Here, we'll look at multi-program measures, question 12 and 13. These questions are very similar, so we wanted to just bring them out and discuss how they are similar. So questions 12 and 13 are asking about justice systems decision points informed by a validated assessment tool and or the results of a data analysis. So you may note that a justice decision point is when an individual and the justice system officially intersect, including interactions with the juvenile justice, juvenile court, or law enforcement official. An assessment is an evaluation or appraisal of an individual's suitability for placement in a specific treatment or modality, and the relationship to custody and supervision, meaning individual identified as low risk may receive diversion. Question 13 is asking the percentage of the justice system's decision points informed by the results of a data analysis. You may have a specific way that you collect this data in your organization, and make sure to sit down and check with the individual in charge of collecting this data when reporting. Question 14 is a program-specific measure. Question 14 asks about costs saved or averted that are then reinvested in evidence-based, community-based programs. You may remember a few slides ago, Erin was discussing the difference between evidence-based programs. So here, we're going to talk a little bit about out-of-home care. So out-of-home care is a court-monitored process that encompasses the placements and services provided to children and families when children are removed from their home due to maltreatment. The general rule is that an out-of-home placement would be a court-monitored process. Some general definitions have been provided in your questions and definitions document. Are you identifying any other out-of-home placements that might not be listed on the question and definition document? If so, perhaps provide that question or that information in the narrative section, which we'll discuss later.
All right, thanks, Kate. Now let's move on to the prevention and intervention outcomes section, which will encompass questions 15 to 20. And again, these are going to have those OJJDP overall measures, which are going to be very broad, and as well as the multi-program measures, which may feel a little more aligned to your program, but you'll really need to make sure that they are aligning to your goals and objectives. I want to start out by noting the first set of questions that you may see are going to be related to status offenses and delinquency offenses. So please be cognizant of this difference when you are collecting the data. Second piece of the performance measure to note is that you will collect this data if it's part of your goals and objectives and if you have access to this particular information. Again, please note that sometimes status offenses and delinquency offenses, this is an example of a place where you may need to put some additional definition around that based on the laws of your jurisdiction. So I'd like to provide some more tips here around eligibility for detention. As you can see from the snapshot, that is a picture of the first and second columns of the definition and questions document. So there is a robust definition there. And we want to note that prevention services, again, are used to hopefully help juveniles from entering the juvenile justice system or prevention towards recidivism. But please note, again, the difference if you're going to define this, and you can put these notes in your narrative questions as well if you're working on prevention services. Let's take a minute to look at question 19. This is asking for numbers of individuals assigned a court-ordered condition, as well as those who violated the court-ordered condition. I want to point out this question specifically because it says number of individuals assigned. That is going to relate back to question 1. So whenever you see number of individuals, please look back at question 1 and look at the total number of individuals that you have tracked in that particular question. That will help give you an idea of who should be reported, for example, here in question 19. Question 19, that number should be a subset of question 1. Again, please document this as you have this information, understanding that there are going to be cases where data sharing agreements might need to happen, and that's okay. If there are challenges with finding out this information, you can offer that to your grant manager in the progress report narrative questions. Okay, so now we're going to look at question 21, which is number of individuals who were released from imprisonment and number of individuals who received post-release parole. Again, please note this is a multi-program measure, so it is assigned to those of you who have a similar type of program, but again, may require you to put some additional shape around this depending on the rules and laws in your jurisdiction. We do, on the definition and questions document, as well as here on the screen, provide a very general definition of what we mean by imprisonment as well as release from imprisonment. But again, please make sure that you are really focusing on two things, which is one, how does this relate to your program? And second, what are the key laws and rules in your jurisdiction that may govern the definition of imprisonment as well as post-release parole? Now let's move on to questions 23 and 24, program quality section. As Kate noted, with these OJJDP overall measures, again, these are going to feel very broad and maybe like they are not aligned to your program or you don't quite see how they fit. Again, these were offered by OJJDP to make sure that all programs had something to report. If this aligns, then you will report this section. If not, then you will report some zeros and move on. All right, so let's start with question 23. This is asking about the number of individuals who completed their intended service requirements. Please note those last two words, service requirements. This is up to you as the grantee to define because, as we said, this is an overall measure. And what service requirements are to one program will be very different to another, and that's okay. It was meant to pull from your program very specific information that OJJDP is looking for to support the goals of the solicitation. So please remember to provide an answer for 23A through G. We do want to provide one clarification here on 23A. This is going to be a total sum of individuals that exited the program regardless of when they completed their service requirements.
Thank you, Erin. The next section is focused on protective factors. Protective factors section includes questions 25 through 31, and these questions are OJJDP overall measures, which once again means that they are very broad and may not fit your program. If they do not fit your program, again, simply enter a 0 and move through the question set. Now, when reading through these protective factors, we wanted to point out some tips. So OJJDP recommends that your organization choose at least one protective factor to report on. So when reading through the protective factors, do you see any of the factors that right away are easy to track, or perhaps you're already tracking them? It is recommended that you report on a factor that will be most convenient for you and your organization to keep data on. And remember, whatever protective factor that you decide to report on, you will have to report repeatedly on that protective factor throughout the life of the award. So perhaps if we look at this screen, with question 1, percentage of eligible individuals with an improved parent or caregiver relationship, perhaps you already track that via a survey or post-release survey. That'd be something that you could work into your reporting and easily collect and track data on. Again, OJJDP recommends at least one protective factor that is relevant to your organization's mission. When picking a protective factor or factors, think about weaving those factors into your organization's program planning process. This may help data collection be a little easier when it's time to report on those numbers. Here we have a question that we'd like to pull out, question 24, and eligible individuals who are actively engaged with school. Again, this is an overall measure, so perhaps you don't ask about school engagement at all in your program, and that's okay. You would just enter a 0 and move on. But if you do ask that question and keep data on actively engaged individuals, we have some examples here. When considering what actively engaged with school means, we provided a few examples here. So it could be anything with increased class participation, good attendance, or setting an academic goal, or even establishing bonds with teachers and other students. Services such as an individualized education plan, a 504 plan, an altered class schedule, or an alternative school will count in this question set. Moving forward to productive lives, we'll see that questions 32 and 34 will be overall measures and multi-program measures. The OJJDP overall measure, question 32, is asking about eligible individuals who completed high school. Again, since this is an overall measure, it's very broad. So if your program only serves youth from ages 7 to 12, then you would likely skip this question. However, if you serve high school age youth, make sure to read through and look at the definition of individuals who received the diploma from a traditional high school, an alternative high school, or their general education development. Make sure to enter that number and move on to the next question. Moving forward to question 34 is a multi-program measure, which again isn't as broad as an OJJDP overall measure, but still may not be working with the services that your organization offers. Again, if we think about the example used in the last slide, if you're serving youth ages 7 to 12, this question or enter a 0.
Okay, let's move on to the program outcomes section, numbers 35 and 36. These are, again, multi-program measures that are going to be provided to a good chunk of OJJDP grantees, but not the same broad spectrum as with the overall measures. The first question that we'd like to look at and highlight is number 35, and this is going to be related to individuals who re-entered out-of-home care. We want to highlight this one because question 35, B through D, will ask about the specific placement of the client. And we have a definition here again for out-of-home care, as Kate had mentioned. This is also available on the definition and questions document. Let's move on to our final section, which is called the Progress Narrative Report, which will be labeled as PNQ in the JustGrants system. There are 20 questions within this Progress Narrative Report, and these are overall measures, again, meaning that these are the same questions that are given to pretty much overall OJJDP grantees. This is a summary of some tips and tricks to think about when focusing on your progress report questions. So again, these are going to be the same questions every reporting period. And the goal here is to really focus on that qualitative or kind of narrative storytelling data. You make sure that you also want to keep an eye on question number 20, which is the secondary protective factor effects, which we'll talk about in the upcoming slides. As you're writing each of the narrative questions within the progress report, please try to focus on a few things. First is you want to try to summarize the work that you've done within the last 6 months and give your grant manager an idea of where you're intending to go in the next 6 months. Each of these progress reports built together should produce, in the end, a very nice story of the overall view of where you've gone from the beginning of the award to the end. Secondly, you also want to make sure that you are drawing some specific stories from your community, from your team, that can really highlight the good work that you're doing every day in your community. And please make sure, as you're summarizing your work, or particularly your goals and objectives, you give your grant manager an idea of where you are with each of them, and say a little bit more than not applicable or in progress, meaning tell your grant manager what that means to you and what that means to your program. Again, use the narrative questions to explain procedures or new processes that you've started, particularly if there's a screening process or if you started a new multidisciplinary team. You will see other questions located within the progress report asking about grant award modifications or updates in hiring and key personnel. So as mentioned, one of the final questions, number 20, is related to protective factor secondary effects. Please note that there are a couple of key questions that if you answer yes to, such as, do you report on protective factors in your performance measures? If you answer yes, those will produce some additional questions for you to answer. In the case of your award, when you see the question, do you report on protective factors, please answer yes. Then you will see another question that says, did you see any secondary protective factor effects during the reporting period? This is where you will choose either yes or no, depending on what you observed. Well, what did you observe? What is a secondary effect of a protective factor? Well, this is an improvement that you have seen in your clients and those you have served that was not initially targeted within the services provided. So for example, if you were providing services to increase school engagement, and you notice that as you have worked with your clients and they have increased their school engagement, you've also noticed some improved mental health, or you have noticed improved attendance with leisure activities. These were not things you directly targeted, but they are positive outcomes, so they're considered a secondary effect, and that's what you would report here in question 20. So a few key takeaways before we wrap up our session for today. Please remember that the performance measures that you report are incredibly helpful to OJJDP to meet not only their requirements for federal legislation and data requests, but also to really show the great work that's being done in the field. Please make sure that you're going through and understanding each of the performance measures you're assigned and if they align to your program. Again, most of the questions will ask for a number, but please watch for a change in the question where some will ask for text instead. Please monitor your data before reporting and check to make sure that your numbers of individuals served, for example, are aligning to some of the other questions that are asking about more specific services or, for example, protective factor effects. What you report in question number 1 is a key validation that can help you with accuracy and consistency in some of the other performance measures.
Thanks, Erin. Before we leave, we'd like to provide some contact information and resources. Here we have some resources for the performance measure reports. So you'll be able to watch a performance measures training and retrieve your progress reporting questions and read general information on reporting tips and terms. You can always email or call to ask about what questions that you need to report or to schedule a 30-minute support session via WebEx. Here we have some printed resources, including an OJJDP general reporting terms sheet. In this sheet, you'll hear most of the phrases and terms that Erin and I spoke about today, including activity period, evidence-based, carried over, and individual search. This slide includes some additional contact information. Again, you can find some tips on performance measures via printed resources. Check out the general terms and definitions documents. You can watch a performance measures training and ask the PMT questions about fiscal year 2019 and prior measures, because again, fiscal year 2019 and prior awards report in a PMT. We also have some resources for Just Grants reporting, so some basic troubleshooting performance reports, performance reporting training, and how to submit a performance report. And again, we just like to provide some additional clarification on which help desk that you can call. So on the left, you can see that you can call the OJJDP PMT help desk to discuss your assigned performance measures per award, where to report, and for your fiscal year 2019 and prior awards, or PMT system accounts, or help unlocking reports. You can contact the Just Grant Service Desk for entity management, including changing roles and permissions, or help locating a performance report, and to problem solve any error messages in Just Grants. That's it for our training today. We hope that you stay connected with OJJDP to stay updated on the latest news and resources. Thank you so much for joining us today.